Okay, everybody. Well, first of all, thank you all so much for dialing into today's session on the subject of the path to a successful ServiceNow Security Operations implementation. So, just kicking off, my name is Steve Matthews, and I'm a solution sales executive in the ServiceNow security team. With me today is my colleague and solution consultant, Timon Kopp.
Hello, everyone.
And we're also joined today by Abby Adesanya of Wrangu. Hi, Abby.
Hi, all. Good
stuff. So really glad you could join us today to talk about ServiceNow Security Operations. It's great to have you here. So everybody, I'd like to point out that we will be taking your questions today. So please feel free to submit them using the Q&A function, and we'll take the last 10 to 15 minutes of the session to go through those questions with you. Okay, so why are we holding this webinar? Well, the purpose of today's session is not a sales pitch. It's not to demo any features or functionality. Instead, it's for us really to have a chat about some of the questions and maybe some of the concerns that customers and prospects have and raise when they're considering taking their first steps with ServiceNow Security Operations, or SecOps, as we call it. So that's the purpose of today's session. Now, we've got Abby in from Wrangu, and Abby, I thought perhaps a good place for us to start today would be for you to introduce yourself to our listeners, explain perhaps a little bit about yourself, your background, and also your ServiceNow experience, so that we understand a bit about who you are and also why you're qualified to talk about this subject.
Yeah, thank you very much, Steve. So yes, my name is Abby Adesanya. Right, so my background, I've been working in the IT industry for over 20 years. I started my journey in ServiceNow in 2010. At the time, I worked for a ServiceNow customer. I was brought in as a platform admin with no prior knowledge to ServiceNow. And for the customer, it was a significant project because it was the first ServiceNow implementation. And with a relatively small team, we were able to deploy the full ITSM module under budget and well within the expected timeframes. I then left to join ServiceNow because I just couldn't get enough of it. I love the platform so much. And I worked there for a number of years in different capacities within the professional services department and pre-sales department. And around the time I actually left ServiceNow to join Wrangu, ServiceNow came out with the security incident response application and vulnerability management application. Then it was called that. And I believe that was around the Geneva release. I was fortunate to work on a few security operation projects at the time. And as you'd imagine, you know, there was limited skills available to that knew the platform as a whole, let alone when the application came out. And that was how I really ended up in the security domain. And ever since, I've been working within this space. I'm a certified information security practitioner and also a certified or ServiceNow certified master architect.
Wow. Okay. So you certainly have been around a bit, and it does certainly seem like you've got a lot of experience when it comes to ServiceNow and also when it comes to ServiceNow Security Operations products. So looking forward to finding out what our conversation today is going to reveal. Now, before we actually get onto our conversation, Abby, I think it probably makes sense to do a very quick recap at a high level as to what ServiceNow Security Operations actually is. And so for that, let's hand over to Timon.
Yes, thank you, Steve, for handing over. Yeah, so some of you may already be familiar with ServiceNow Security Operations, but some of you may not. Therefore, we decided to do a short introduction on the product portfolio. So if you are already familiar with it, feel free to this is your last chance to grab a coffee and be back in 3 minutes. But when we talk about ServiceNow security operations, we usually refer to our two main applications, which are security incident response and vulnerability response. The first one being the reactive part and the second one being the proactive one. Now, the goal of both products, of course, is to increase the efficiency of the security teams and make life easier for them. The strategy here is similar, or the approach is similar to other parts of ServiceNow. We basically try to reduce the walls between the different teams, departments, and business units and bring them on the same layer of data and communication. In both cases, we require an existing point solution, or we recommend an existing point solution and a healthy CMDB as the foundation. But I think you will get more insight into this when you listen to Steve and Abby talking later on. Taking security incident response as the first example, we ingest events and security incidents from different sources like CM solutions, emails, or catalog items. But doing proper prioritization or ascertaining its business criticality requires lots of data from different sources. And that usually is quite difficult. Responding to security incident oftentimes involves different tools, processes, teams, and this is where ServiceNow can be the layer responsible for collecting all that information, enriching security incidents with information from internal, so from its CMDB, or from external third-party tools and vendors. So in the end, they can basically present the analyst with a freshly baked security incident containing all the information. Response can then be enhanced by leveraging out-of-the-box workflows, visibility controls, tasks that can be shared across the platform, so also to IT teams, for example, playbooks, and out-of-the-box SOAR capabilities. When it comes to vulnerability response, our reactive, proactive part, the goal, of course, is to decrease the attack surface of your IT landscape. But because vulnerability scanners do their job so well that handling all the findings in a realistic time frame becomes very difficult. And understanding the business relations of the vulnerabilities is therefore a crucial part of prioritization. But due to the lack of insight into the company's infrastructure, this is usually very hard to do. And therefore, vulnerability response by making use of ServiceNow's single data model and CMDB can help vulnerability teams automatically prioritize vulnerabilities based on the data that's relevant to your company. And then we can apply logical groupings into manageable chunks and automatically assign those groups of vulnerabilities out to the responsible teams for further remediation, and use the other integrations, for example, ITSM integrations for directing and tracking implementations. And of course, for further ease of use, we provide workspaces for both tools and also pre-built dashboards for gaining a better, higher level visibility of your whole security posture. So that's about a short introduction of our security operations portfolio. But because in theory this sounds very nice, and we want to get some practical answers from Abby in the real life, in the real world. So handing back to Steve and Abby.
Thanks. Thanks for that one, Timon. Thanks for that. Yeah, so I guess the whole idea is to use the SecOps capabilities of the Now platform to really reduce the time and effort that we need to manage security incidents and vulnerabilities, and really to reduce the associated risk. So, Abby, I've got an interesting statistic for you here. I'd be keen to get your thoughts on it. So over 90% of ServiceNow customers that have implemented security operations, they were already using some other ServiceNow applications. So in your opinion, is this necessary, or do you think an organization can really start its ServiceNow journey with security operations? What do you think?
Okay, so I'll address in the question of if it's necessary. I think my response to that is yes, it is definitely necessary. It does help a great deal for a smoother and quicker implementation. Being an existing customer means that you are already established on the platform, and as such, having all the foundational data, the service models, the processes established. And this looks like, for example, users being imported, groups being defined, user accesses are sorted out, and most especially, CMDB being populated. However, having said that, there are still customers who do tend to start their ServiceNow journey with SecOps. What this really means for them is that they'll need to spend some time addressing these service models, foundational data, processes, CMDBs. They need to spend time focusing on that before they can actually start the SecOps implementation.
Okay, so I mean, that's a good point there. So it does help to have the foundation in place. It helps to be using the platform already, to have a CMDB and all that fine stuff. Okay, correct. So I've got that. Now, which other prerequisites should I bear in mind before I can actually begin to implement SecOps within the enterprise?
Right, so I guess obviously you would already have the pain points and challenges that's brought you here to be looking for a solution. But what is very important is clarity, and clarity in the sense of the outcomes that you want to achieve from the implementation. And this also leads to my second point on what you need to have, as in the prerequisites, is this clarity. In order to get the clarity and you need to be able to articulate what that outcome should be. So you need to spend more time in the values and the benefits that you're going to get out of the implementation. And you need an implementation partner, a right implementation partner, to help you on that journey. And one of the first steps that you can do on this is to actually check the ServiceNow Partner Finder on the ServiceNow website. Finally, obviously look into the licensing structure, get an understanding of what you need. And for your internal teams, get them as much as possible on every SecOps training that you can. It will definitely help during and after the implementation.
Okay, good stuff. Now, one of the points we briefly touched upon at the beginning of the conversation was the importance of the CMDB, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, we know that this forms the foundation of ServiceNow within the customer enterprise. And I guess from a security perspective, it also performs two key roles. So on the one hand, we like to use the data in the CMDB to provide the business context that's going to enable us to better prioritize security incidents on the one hand, and vulnerabilities on the other hand. And then when it comes to ticketing and remediation efforts, we can use again the data in the CMDB to ensure that the remediation tickets or the work tickets are sent to the right teams. Now, a question that very, very frequently comes up and is asked by customers is, how mature does my CMDB have to be in order for me to start using SecOps? So based on your experience, Abby, how would you respond to that question?
That's a very good question. A lot of people do ask this question. But before I answer that, I think it's important to note that the CMDB in itself is a journey as such. And I'm yet to see a customer who's got 100% maturity on the CMDB. So yes, it is important. I cannot stress that fact enough. But you can still implement SecOps at whatever maturity level you're in. And just to share some sort of typical challenges on this CMDB maturity, they tend to be things like, as you mentioned earlier, on the business context. There's limited to no relationships to the said logical layers, so the technical services, the business services. Calling out another one in the sense of lack of ownership or associated support groups or approval groups. Another one again could be the lack or missing attributes that can be used for prioritization and categorization. So all this information that resides in the CMDB, these are the things that help the process. And to throw this in here is that a good approach to sort of addressing these challenges and building out the CMDB is sort of using the CSDM, ServiceNow CSDM framework. And the CSDM framework is an essential part of ServiceNow's data model that supports all the workflows within the platform, from ITBM to ITOM to ITSM, all the way up to SecOps.
Yeah, no, that's a very, very good point, actually. And it kind of ties into the next question that we're asked, because after the customer says to us, okay, how mature does my CMDB have to be? The next point is, well, my CMDB isn't really mature at all. What do I need to do? So based on your experience of working with ServiceNow over the years, what recommendations do you have for people who are out there and who want to improve the quality of their CMDB? Any best practices you can suggest?
Yeah, again, just saying it's CMDB is, you could still implement SecOps no matter what level you're in that journey of the CMDB maturity. And sharing a couple of scenarios where, how SecOps in itself or other platform features can help augment the CMDB or act as a workaround. These are scenarios where, for example, when you're looking at the issue of coverage, the coverage of your CMDB, it's a known fact that security tools are very notorious for their wide coverage. They tend to be in everything. So it's worth considering how to allow scanning devices or scanning tools to populate your CMDB. However, I will say, I suggest ensuring that this process is sort of somewhat semi-automated. You still need to have a level of review or approval on these CIs before they eventually end up as CIs in the CMDB. Another challenge that we tend to see and what we've used to address them, as I mentioned earlier on, is the missing attributes, or as I like to refer to them as enrichment data. So for example, things like the CIA ratings, or whether or not a device is internet facing. These are critical attributes that we could use for prioritization and categorization. And you can use, the ServiceNow features of data lookups that can help you build lookup rule sets to identify and classify vulnerabilities, for example, as they come in. And finally, another one is, assignment rules, assignment data. You might be missing that information. Again, you could develop data-driven assignment logic to help you assign vulnerability security incidents to the right teams based on information that you can pull out from specific processes and the CMDB, or the lack of the information in the CMDB. But again, I'll say these are just examples of how we can address these points. But the main point here is that they're just workarounds till you get your CMDB in a good shape.
Okay, that's good to know. I mean, I want to stay with the CMDB for a moment, because a typical topic that comes up is that security teams, especially when we're talking about teams responsible for vulnerability management, they are beneficiaries of a good, clean CMDB, right? However, they're not responsible for the CMDB. So how have you guys at Wrangu managed to bring together the security teams and the team responsible for the CMDB to ensure the success of a vulnerability response implementation project?
Well, this is where I think the organizational change management plays a very important part in keeping teams informed and engaged. One thing I'd mention, though, is that the whole OCM should be done early and should be an objective during the implementation. Even after the implementation, these types of collaboration still will exist and are useful in solving issues that you might have. So, for example, within the vulnerability response application, you need to have established a cadence between the security team, the platform team, the CMDB team, to be able to review discovered items as they've occurred. So, again, to address the question that you asked, really having that engagement upfront, getting people informed, get the communications right, will definitely help and prolong the benefits that you're getting, not just during the implementation, but also afterwards.
Okay, thanks for that, Abby. That's some sound advice. Now, moving on from the subject of the CMDB, it's no secret that ServiceNow is best known for IT service management. And what I would say is that the vast majority of our customers are using ITSM. It's typically the first product they go for. And a very common question that we see from clients is, can't I just use ITSM to manage security incidents and vulnerabilities? I've already invested in it. I just want to use that. Why is that going to be an issue?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I've got my own thoughts on this, but I'd be very keen to hear yours from an implementation perspective.
Yeah, this is another question that comes up often, especially from customers who are, as you mentioned, heavily invested in the ITSM module. And again, my response is usually no, not because I just like SecOps, but there are two main reasons. One of them is to do with the process. ITIL doesn't really provide any specific guidelines on how to handle security incidents and events. And as such, you'd sort of need to customize the application. Thus, you're creating more technical debt. And however, SecOps, that comes readily out of the box with the NIST and SANS process. The second option, or the second point that I always like to make is around access. Again, ITSM, the incident, typically engages users that should not necessarily have access to security incidents and events, and that in itself defeats the principle of least privilege, and it often tends to get flagged during audits, especially when customers are they've been audited and they're using that incident. They get flagged as a failing for that, and as you know, with SecOps, it's an application that even the platform admins can be actually restricted from viewing security incidents.
Okay.
But sorry, go on.
I just want to play devil's advocate for a moment, Abby. So if we look at an ITSM implementation, and I totally agree with what you're saying, you certainly don't want users who can access ITSM to see the content of a security incident ticket, for example. But surely we could customize ITSM to prevent them from accessing that type of data, couldn't we?
Yeah. Again,
what's the problem with that then?
One of the things that I've picked up over the years, and I normally tell customers, is that one of ServiceNow's strength is its flexibility, and also it tends to be its weakness. And the whole point of this customization, so in the two examples I gave, which yes, you can customize the processes to be aligned to SANS and NIST. Yes, you can configure ACLs, business rules, all that stuff to make sure that people have limited access. But what you are doing is you're creating that technical debt into the platform. And over time, well, apart from reinventing the wheel because SecOps already exists, but over time, you're creating an ongoing expense of managing that process, because once you customize it, you own it. And when it comes to platform upgrades, these are things that you need to take into consideration. And over time, it just ends up being more expensive, as we've seen.
No, that's a good point. And I mean, to be perfectly honest, it's something we're seeing quite a lot of at the moment. So we have a number of customers who are going back to out of the box on ServiceNow because they've realized they've just customized too much, and their ServiceNow instance is no longer manageable. So no, I'm totally with you on that one. Okay, so let's move on to the next one. So look, I can appreciate that using ITSM for incidents and vulnerabilities, or security incidents and vulnerabilities, isn't exactly best practice, but I have to make improvements in both of these areas. So as a professional, as a security professional, as a ServiceNow professional, where should I start? What do you recommend?
Yeah, I think for this, there isn't a right or wrong answers. They're both burning issues. And in this case, for a successful delivery, we always tend to advise that, let's tackle let's focus on the low hanging fruits. Let's focus on the real outcomes we want to achieve. Let's make sure that whatever the challenges we're having, let's address them as early as possible. And that way, it could mean that, yes, we want to do security incident response first, because we know that reactively we're not managing that process, and we've got many audits on us for that. So we need to address address the security incident response in our organization. Or maybe it's more, we're doing well on that reactive side, but we just don't know what vulnerabilities are in our estate. Then again, these are how we sort of try and understand what's the best place to start the implementation.
Yeah, good stuff. Okay, so there's no one size fits all, and it really depends on what your requirements are and the
Correct.
outcomes you want to achieve. Okay, good stuff. Now, what I'd like to do for a moment is go to the subject of security incident response, and specifically the subject of automating our response to security incidents. Now, what we've been seeing is there's more and more organizations are thinking about how they can use automation to achieve more efficiencies in their security operations centers. And one of the things they're considering here is the implementation of a SOAR product. So just getting your opinion here, why do you think a ServiceNow customer should consider security incident response instead of implementing a standalone SOAR solution? Got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, in my opinion, in such scenarios, one of the main challenges with implementing a standalone SOAR product is the connectivity to other systems where data resides. In this case, ServiceNow. So yes, these SOARs could have great functionality, brilliant features, but it's only as intelligent as the data it has and it gets access to. So you see with these customers, they spend more time looking at how do we extract data out of ServiceNow into this standalone system, and that in itself creates a lot of technical debt and administration overhead. Another benefit where ServiceNow does better is in the collaboration. By using the platform, ServiceNow helps breaking down the silos between teams, because the data is easily accessible. People who have access will see the data that they need. The processes are aligned. It's quite easy to transfer an incident into a security incident, and it really just enriches that security incident journey within the platform.
Good stuff. Yeah. No, I tend to agree. I think, if you're on the ServiceNow platform and you've invested in ServiceNow, then, you should definitely try to make use of the capabilities on the platform instead of then looking to point solutions.
Correct.
Okay,
yeah.
so let's go to the actual implementation itself. Yeah. So you mentioned a few factors right at the beginning. You mentioned that it makes sense to be an existing ServiceNow customer, to be using the platform, to have a CMDB in place. But what do you think needs to be in place from an organizational perspective to ensure the success of an implementation of SecOps?
Well, as you begin to expand on the usage of the platform, you must have in place a process for capturing and articulating sort of the strategic demands that are coming in. And also you need to be able to have or should have had an established technical governance for the platform. Again, it's all about the outcomes. You need to be able to have clearly defined objectives and also defined KPIs associated to them, so it's easily to track where you are on that journey as well. I've mentioned OCM earlier on. Again, OCM, which is the organizational change management, that plays another key part too as well, because it helps drive buy-in from stakeholders and also adoption to employees actually using the system.
Yeah. Do you have any horror stories? Horror stories of where organizational change management has not been properly implemented? What can happen if you don't observe it?
Well, yeah. So, in instances where it's not paid attention to, and one of the things that is very obvious is the lack of training that has been organized before within the organization, or confusion around the frontline employees. A classic example that we tend to see, not so much confusion, but where we're trying to deploy SecOps, and then the security teams might have a security incident task, and they want to assign it to the network team, and the network team turns around and says, well, actually, I don't know how to handle this because I don't have any SLAs defined, OLAs or contracts in place. So what do I do when I have an incident of the same priority? And that's when you start to see, they haven't, that part of the change management hasn't really happened. Again, another example is where no clear performance matrix has been defined, so you don't really know what good success looks like. I mentioned adoption earlier on. Yeah, there's always low adoption because there's no plan to communicate success stories, or recognize or reward early adopters of the platform. And this ultimately leads to sort of like a team that is not ready or responsive to changes. They're just so anti-change. Anything that you bring across just becomes a bottleneck for them.
Okay. No, that's a very, very good point. So for all those of you who are listening today, make sure you get your organizational change management sorted out before deploying SecOps, and not just SecOps, any
project, really.
Any project at all. So talking about projects, we see all sorts of implementation projects at ServiceNow. Yeah, so we see organizations going for a small start and then growing over time, and we see other organizations with a kind of bigger, bolder approach where they're looking to implement lots of different products in a kind of big bang. Based on your experience, Abby, what would you recommend and why?
Well, there are certainly pros and cons to both approaches. I personally, I'm a fan of starting small, and that would be my recommendation, because as you work your way up the maturity scale, it's just easier. The advantages for me is that you get a quicker return on investment. You can see the progress, and also it also helps with the adoption. So yeah, definitely start small.
Okay, that's good. That's good. I mean, that's our recommendation at ServiceNow too. So we have the crawl, walk, run approach. So we always recommend starting small wherever's possible. So if we are talking about starting small, of course, many customers are going to start with an MVP, right?
Yeah.
So based on your experience, maybe you could describe to us what an MVP could look like for a ServiceNow SecOps product. So whether it's vulnerability response or security incident response, just to give the listeners a flavor of, what they could potentially expect.
Right. Okay. I guess typically this would look like, first of all, really identifying a few use cases. So for example, for security incident response, this could be ingesting events or incidences from a third-party SIEM like Sentinel, and then addressing the workflow that comes with handling these incidents, such as automated triage in the form of prioritization, categorization, and assignment to the right teams. Then we'll then look at the next stage, which would be more about triggering the associated playbooks or orchestration activities that are required to help in the remediation steps. And that would be sort of a very high level use case for security incident response. Similarly, for vulnerability response, could do the same thing in terms of ingesting vulnerabilities and the associated affected assets from scanners, the likes of Qualys, Tenable, Rapid7, to end up creating what we call vulnerable items within ServiceNow. And again, these are just basically the vulnerabilities and the assets together in a single record. Then but once those records are created, the VITs that I mean, then you'd want to go through a similar automation of triage, well, basically triaging the vulnerable items to get these vulnerable items assigned to the right remediation teams, where IT changes can be created, patches automated, and ultimately these vulnerabilities will be closed by the scanning tool. So these are just high-level use cases where we could use for our MVPs, and the customer can actually start seeing the benefits from that.
Yeah, that's good stuff. So I guess the next question following on from that is the $64,000 question. Staying on the subject of the MVP, are you able to give the listeners any indication of how long the implementation of an MVP could take, or typically does take?
Oh dear, this is
not putting you on the spot or anything,
Right. It's definitely a tricky one, and it's one I always struggle to answer. But I guess to put a number on it, and really emphasizing the word MVP here, right? Yeah, you could say maybe between 4 to 6 weeks you could get an MVP up and running. Okay. But again, it really depends on the scope that you're working with. I just gave a very high level use case of specific scopes that you could have. But again, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, folks. So you heard it here first. Yeah. not going to hold you to that one then, Abby.
I know what's going to happen after this now.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, so we're kind of getting close to the end now, and so a very, very common or frequently asked question when it comes to implementations of SecOps is, okay, what are the main do's and don'ts? Yeah, what should I definitely do? What should I definitely avoid to enhance my chances of success? What can you give us? Stories out of the war chest.
Just going over the sort of comments, questions that we've covered. I guess the first one is, please start small, avoid big bang where possible. Again, it's all about outcomes. Make sure you have your discovery sessions to assess your challenges and to plan out what these outcomes should look like. Spend time in getting and articulating and developing an implementation roadmap. Engagement to get all key stakeholders engaged early on in the project, and it's not just within the security domains. Just make sure that you get a full coverage across the business. Pay attention to ServiceNow implementation best practices, again around the governance, the technical governance, strategic governance, organizational change management. We've talked about that a lot today. And there are also good resources that you can get from the ServiceNow website. I think there's one called the Success Playbook that tells you about the implementation journey. So yeah, there's a lot of wealth of information you can get from ServiceNow. Perfect.
Thanks for that. Okay. Now, obviously, one of the key reasons we deploy or implement SecOps is because we expect to see some benefits out of it. Now, Timon talked a little bit about some of the benefits when he briefly introduced the solutions earlier. But once the products are up and running, in your experience from the real world, what kind of benefits can the customer expect to see?
I start off with operational agility, right? So the customer is able to respond quicker to incidences with automated triaging, categorization, and assignments. Again, they're building a better cyber resilience, basically providing, a better handle on your security posture. And an example is, in how you identify, prioritize, and mitigate vulnerabilities. So yeah, you having that very good rounded picture. And ultimately, what this really tells, another benefit from that is that the organization will have a good understanding of what their risk appetite is.
Good stuff. No, I agree with that. So, I mean, in terms of the benefits, those are clear. I guess what we need to understand as well from the customer's perspective is what's the time to value. And I mean, this is something that we're seeing more and more often, that customers are expecting, simply because of the nature of the current financial and economic situation, they're expecting a really fast return on investment. So if you look back at the projects you've been involved with at Wrangu, what would you say is the typical time to value for the average SecOps customer? Now, I realize it's a difficult one because everyone's got different use cases, but it would be interesting to hear your perspective.
Yeah, this is where I was going to say, well, it really depends. But yes, it does depend on the scope and the challenges that you're trying to address. But yeah, the values, the realization of the value and benefits that you can get from the implementation can be as short as day one of go live. To put this into context, say for example, you're an organization who's really struggling in your vulnerability response process. You know, your main challenge here is that your remediation is very manual. There's loads of spreadsheets everywhere, limited visibility between teams. Yeah, you just can't get a handle of what your exposure is. By actually implementing the vulnerability response, you know, as I mentioned, the initial use case or MVP version, where you just ingest these vulnerabilities that you're putting into spreadsheets, you have that ingested into the vulnerability response application. You've got your categorization and your assignment logic all sorted out. On the day of go live, you know, that's your value there. You've moved away from spreadsheets. So, you know, again, one of the ways to actually ensure that you're hitting these values, obviously, I just mentioned day one as an example, but if you've taken the scopes and your challenges and your outcomes and you've put them into the sort of phased approach, the crawl, the walk, the run, you will be getting your values as those phases are being released.
That's excellent. That's excellent. And I mean, just, you know, you guys at Wrangu, obviously your focus really is on the security and the risk aspects of ServiceNow. How do you stay on top of the changes in the customer's needs as the customer matures?
Yeah, so Wrangu specializes in IRM solutions. Are a team of brilliant consultants, are not just ServiceNow SecOps, ServiceNow specialists, but they're also specialists in their own domain, be it in integrated risk or be it in security operations. So we have a wealth of knowledge and experience, and we sort of act as a trusted advisor to a customer to just sort of help them really in the security or integrated risk management implementation and ServiceNow.
Okay, that's good. Thank you very much for that. Okay, so we're coming now to the end of the 45 minutes that we'd scheduled for the actual discussion. So we've now come to the questions part, and let's have a look and see what we've got in terms of questions. There's only one open question. Thomas has answered some of the other ones. And the question is this one: how does CIA, the confidentiality, integrity, and availability, how does this fit into ServiceNow's vulnerability response product? And what does it translate to?
Yeah, that's a good one. So typically on the CMDB, you'll have crown jewels, and these crown jewels are just basically you have the attributes and this CIA, the confidentiality, integrity, and availability are again attributes that you could use to classify how important this asset is to the business, and how that applies to vulnerability response is how you actually want to respond to them. So if I have a vulnerability on one that has, you know, both three options flagged, then I know that actually this is high priority, And this is one of the benefits of using ServiceNow, that you have this business context, because the vulnerability scanning tool could say, yes, there's a vulnerability that is highly exploitable. Script kids can do it. But then when it comes into ServiceNow, you might not even have that, that system that it affects might be in an air gaps environment, and it's not a critical business because it doesn't have any of these CIAs flagged. So you could downgrade the priority so that the teams can actually work on what's more important. But that's how it translates into vulnerability management. It's more about that categorization and prioritization, and making sure that the teams are focusing on what is really critical.
Yeah, so it's the combination of security data from the scanner and information from the CMDB that enriches that data to provide that business context, and it enables us to prioritize the vulnerabilities that we want to focus on. That's great. Well, look, thank you very much. Good question. Just looking to see if we'll get any further questions out there. The answer is no. So in that case, everyone, if there are no further questions that you would like to put into the chat, on behalf of Wrangu and ServiceNow, I'd like to say thank you so much for taking time this afternoon to spend it with us. We hope the session was of interest to you. Thank you, Timon. Thank you very much, Abby.
Thank you very much
for your participation, for sharing your experience with us. And of course, if anyone has any questions at all after the session, please feel free to reach out to us. We'd be very, very happy to assist.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you,
Bye.
everyone. Goodbye.
Cheers.